Q&A off what, just all different platforms?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
I think mainly TikTok and YouTube.
Okay. So if y'all are wondering, we're driving a 2001 360 Modena Ferrari, and it's a 3-pedal car, or what people refer to as a gated shifter car, which is more popular now. Pretty cool. So we did major service, timing belts, water pump rebuild, pretty standard stuff on top of that. Did a new clutch, upgraded a bunch of the clutch components, new AC compressor, just went through the whole car, and basically any rear main seal was leaking a little bit, so replaced that. A lot of stuff. So this is just final test drive. So what questions you got?
Alright. This one is from TikTok. The person's name is Bryce_223.
Bryce_223?
Yep.
Okay.
He said, I'm so confused. Why even buy the Elephant to just build another one? You said new block, rotating assembly and heads. That's basically another engine.
Yeah, I'll agree with you, Bryce. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It's kind of a special situation. Everything with the car you'll see as it unfolds is to a very extreme level. What I mean by that is like stuff that's all one-off, like nicer than anything you can buy. It's all be custom made. So he originally had the idea to, it kind of escalated into things. So started off as like stage 4 package, and then he thought it'd be a cool idea to get a Elephant engine, put that in there. You have to understand this guy is, obviously he's financially well off, so budget is not really as big of a concern. Not like in a manner where it's like, showboating. Actually quite the opposite. He likes the process probably more than anything. So when we got the Elephant engine, we didn't know like how good the stuff was or how bad. They didn't really release a lot of information on it. So he wanted to take it apart and see, what it consisted of, how good the parts were, what all was in there. And so to do that, we disassembled it and to make a decision on whether he wanted to upgrade anything. So as do most things with his projects, they kind of escalated, and we found out that the internal components, they're not bad, so I don't want to talk negatively about it. It's a super cool motor, but they could definitely be upgraded. Once you all start seeing some stuff like that's going to be on this build, it'll make more sense, because this stuff is very over the top. Basically manufacturers that build all this stuff for the F1 cars are building all the components to this. So this is, and some of this stuff is higher than what's on F1 cars, which is the pinnacle of engineering. So it's only higher because there are certain regulations in F1 that there's materials that they cannot use. So we're using the materials that they're not allowed to use. But like I said, it'll make more sense. Super interesting build. Ready on 3.
Ready on 3. My question is, when you are racing, in parentheses, street races, for instance, do you need to shift in peak torque or peak horsepower?
No, peak horsepower. Or maybe just slightly over peak. What you're wanting to do is keep the car in its power band, so without over revving it, and so there's going to be, obviously this is going to differ pretty drastically compared to like what engine it is, what kind, naturally aspirated, built, not built. Peak torque is going to be, your peak torque is always going to be right in the beginning. So if you're on a dyno or whatever, and you first go to wide open throttle, that very initial hit is going to be your peak torque. So from there, it's going to steadily decline all the way to redline. I think I mentioned this before. Torque and horsepower are going to intersect at 5,252 RPM every single time. You'll see that on a dyno graph. There's a whole mathematical reason why, but for the sake of this conversation, it's not really relevant. So if you shift it at peak torque, you'd basically floor it and shift it right away. Torque is what gets the mass in motion. It gets it moving. Horsepower is what keeps it going. Your RPMs might go down to 54, you know, or 50. So you want to as quick a shift as possible, so that it lets the RPM drop as little as possible and keeps it in that power range. You don't want to over rev the engine in any scenario, built or not, especially like a stock engine. If you look at the stress on components, once you start reaching max RPM, the level of stress per 100 RPM starts going up like exponentially. So it's not like a linear amount of stress, it's exponential. So you can do a lot of damage real quick.
This is from Leo May on YouTube. He said, what pulley brand setup do you recommend and why? Grip tech versus Mecco versus Litton's, clutched versus non-clutched, and the two main factors I'd like to hear about. Reliability of the pulley system itself, and number 2, stress on the supercharger. Cue in any other relevant info, please. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to give you basically 2 different schools of thoughts and recommendation, and it's going to be basically determined on if you're leaving the supercharger stock internally or you're going to modify the supercharger. So the stock pulley is a clutched pulley, which means like when the stress comes on and off the supercharger quickly, like during a wide open throttle shift or whatever, kind of like a dual mass flywheel, it's gonna have some spring action. Okay, it's not gonna be like a 1-to-1 ratio, and so that's gonna have like a reduced shock to the supercharger drive. Okay, inside the stock supercharger there are some drive pins, and they engage with some bushings. The drive pins are not really incredibly strong, so we upgrade those with hardened pins and custom bushings and everything. So if you're not going to do all that, no porting and polishing, I think you're probably a safer bet is to leave the clutch pulley on, just like the Dodge engineers intended. I'm not super knowledgeable on all the different clutch pulleys, just because we don't touch the supercharger at all unless we modify the supercharger. So Hellraiser, I'm assuming they make a good one. That's what's on the Demon supercharger. Litton's, I've never heard anything bad about them. They're probably very close to the same. You're probably not going to go wrong with either one. The reason we don't ever do that is because we always change the lower pulley first, because it gives us the opportunity to pin the crankshaft, and that's a known weak area on that engine that could lead to a damaged crankshaft. I try to make things, if I can increase reliability in addition to power, that's the route that I'm always going to go. And I'm going to try to give the customer the most that they can get for the money. So I would recommend pinning the crankshaft. So to do that, you basically have most of the labor involved at changing the pulley out. You have to do a couple other things, modify the timing cover, but most of what you're going to pay for labor to do that, you could change the lower pulley for just the cost of the lower pulley. So then you end up with an engine with a better balancer, a pin crankshaft, you've eliminated a weak point, and you've added a little bit of boost, and you haven't touched the stock supercharger at all. So you've done nothing to decrease reliability, you've done everything to increase reliability and power at the same time. So that's like stage 2. Once we get to stage 4 and up, that's going to require changing a pulley on the supercharger. So like I said, we don't ever do that because the internal parts of the supercharger, in my opinion, need to be upgraded. They can prematurely wear out even with a clutch pulley. So if you're going to take the supercharger off and do this, it makes sense to port and polish it and maximize the amount of power that you're going to get, maximize the amount of airflow you're going to get through the engine with as little restriction or excessive boost as possible. So since we upgrade all that stuff, we go with a solid pulley setup, as we don't really need the clutch. And I think the clutch, anytime you're slipping a clutch in anything, it's going to cause extra heat. And so I think that prematurely can lead to bearing wear. I've seen it so bad where it actually bend, it'll warp the main shaft. So you essentially damage the front drive of the supercharger. As far as what brand pulley to go with that, I think Grip Tech makes a nice pulley. We do our own pulleys, strictly for the fact that we put we do a coating where the belt rides, okay? And so it's not as harsh on the belt as like a Grip Tech is. But the main reason we do that is because if you look at like the 10 rib serpentine belts, especially like the green ones, the HD belts that we typically run, if you look at the groove profile on each of the 10 ribs, it's a kind of a shallow, it's not really a V, it's like a shallow kind of like oval at the end. Where if you look at the pulleys, they have a deep V-shaped groove in them. So if you kind of took the pulley in your hand and you stuck the belt in the grooves and looked at it, you would see that there's a good portion of each rib that is not in contact with the pulley itself, mainly the bottom V. So, you know, you're reducing the surface area between the belt and the pulley. So I think you can gain a lot. So we basically machine those grooves where they perfectly match the belt grooves. That way we're maximizing the surface area that the belt has on the pulley, along with a coating that's conducive to not slipping, and it's a solid pulley. So the other pulleys on the market, they have the deep groove. So you can just take a look at a belt. I might have hit the mic. So take a look at a belt and then look at the pulley, and you'll probably see what I'm talking about. So that's why.
So their GoPro died. That's why my arm got in the way. Cam Link said, you think Dodge should have done something more for the Daytona?
You know, I don't really know. But the only platform that we work on is the Hellcat stuff. To be honest, like, not to sound like a dumbass, but I don't even know exactly what the Daytona comes with. I think it's like an RT with like some appearance stuff, but I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that. So yeah, I'm probably not the most knowledgeable to answer that, you know, in all honesty.
All right.
Is that all of them?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. You know, if y'all have any more questions or whatever, again, just, you know, leave them in the comments. Angel's super good about, you know, keeping track of them, so we try to answer all of them that we can. Especially if we see some that are answered several times, you know, it's a good indication that it's pretty, you know, topic people want to know about. So whether I've talked about it before or not, I have no problem answering it again.
There you go.
All right, cool.
Till next one.